Hey everyone, welcome to Wealth Redefined. I'm your host, Michael Reynolds, certified financial planner and owner of Elevation Financial. As always, I'm on the web at elevationfinancial.com if you'd like to find me there. I'm also on all the socials pretty much, so you're welcome to reach out anytime. All right, today we're going to talk about debit card fraud, protecting your money, understanding the consequences of debit card fraud, and just all about debit card fraud. So, as we move toward a more cashless society, our financial transactions are mostly virtual. We don't use cash a whole lot anymore, and debit cards are a popular choice for many people. So it's no secret that I prefer debit cards over credit cards. So we're going to kind of mostly focus on debit cards today. But with using debit cards comes some risks, and I like to be very clear and acknowledge that as well. With the convenience of using debit cards over cash, the convenience does come with some risk of debit card fraud, and that can have significant consequences for your money. Those unauthorized transactions can drain your bank account. There's lots of ways scammers can use different methods to get your information. And so we're going to talk about the world of debit card fraud, exploring the various ways that criminals exploit vulnerabilities, how to prevent these things from happening, how to prevent becoming a victim, and just general knowledge about the topic. So let's first talk about how debit card fraud occurs. It can occur through various different ways, so it's really important to understand the various methods that scammers use to capture your debit card information. So here's some of the most common. Skimming. Skimming is one of the most common tactics for getting debit card information. This is where a fraudster will use a small device to steal card information in an otherwise normal, legitimate transaction. For example, they might put a skimming device on an ATM or a gas station terminal or some kind of point of sale terminal that reads and stores all the details in the card's magnetic stripe. So skimming is a very popular way to get credit card information, or debit card information, I should say, or both really, but we're talking debit cards today. So phishing is another way. Phishing involves tricking the cardholder into revealing their card's details. So the scammer might send an email or a text message that looks like it's from a legitimate source, like your bank or a payment service. And they use this method to ask the credit or the debit card holder to confirm the card information, thus capturing the information. So this comes in the form of, like, if you get an email that looks like it's from your bank and it says, hey, log in here and enter your card information to verify and unlock your card because it's been frozen or something. And you have to click a link and you put your card information in, goes to a fake site, scammer gets your info. Carding. Carding is when you already have the card, when the scammer already has access to your information. They do a test transaction, a tiny transaction, to see if the card is still active, hoping you won't notice. If the transaction goes through, then that's a green light for them to make larger purchases or sell the card details on the black market. It's called carding. Data breaches happen as well. This is when hackers manage to break into a company's database, for example, to steal customer information, which includes debit card details. They can use this data themselves, or they can sell it to other criminals as well. And then physical theft. Physical theft is the most straightforward. This is where the scammer or the fraudster steals the debit card directly from the owner, maybe stealing it from a home or stealing it from a wallet or from a purse, and then has the information. So what are some consequences of debit card fraud? So the immediate consequence is the money leaves your bank account immediately. So, that can drain your bank account and leave you without access to the money. That's a risk of using debit cards and having debit card fraud, because that money is immediately withdrawn from your bank account. Also, it can be emotional and just stressful because you have to, recover the money. It's time and effort. You feel violated. It's just an emotional issue. Can also damage your credit score if the fraudulent transactions are not reported quickly and promptly. This can have long-term implications on your credit score. So it's really important to take immediate action. We'll talk about more of that in a minute, but take immediate action when you suspect debit card fraud to make sure these don't happen. All right, so different types of credit card or debit card fraud. Debit card fraud is in different forms. Sometimes it's account takeover, where the fraudster gains unauthorized access to your debit card account, makes transactions without your knowledge or consent. They might change account information to complicate the recovery process, kind of taking it over, identity theft, so to speak. Card not present fraud is also when debit card information is used for online transactions without the physical presence of the card. They might use it to buy something online, for example. And again, identity theft we've touched on as well, where they use stolen personal information to open new accounts or make fraudulent transactions, as well as counterfeit card fraud, where they create fake debit cards using stolen information in your name. So what are some signs of debit card fraud? So detecting debit card fraud early is really, really important to minimize the damage caused. So some signs that you might have fraudulent activity in your debit card include unexplained or unfamiliar transactions. That's pretty obvious. We would all be suspicious of that. Notifications or calls from your bank regarding suspicious activity, or even the receipt of new cards or PINs that you didn't request. If you get a new PIN in the mail you didn't request, that could be a sign that someone is trying to get access to your debit card. So review your account statements on a regular basis. Monitor your transactions. Pay attention to unusual activity. You've got to stay vigilant. A lot of us just kind of don't pay attention on a daily basis to our money flow in and out, but it's really, really important to stay vigilant and monitor your transactions very carefully. So as a side effect, or a side effect of budgeting, I should say, is that you are more vigilant. So I'm a big fan of budgeting, as you know. So if you budget your money using a tool like YNAB or Mint or something like that, or even just monitoring your bank transactions very carefully, a side effect of budgeting is that you will be more prone to notice suspicious activity. So if you're budgeting and tracking your transactions, you'll naturally catch this suspicious activity. So that's a nice side effect of budgeting, in addition to the benefits of budgeting. So how do you prevent debit card fraud? So first, make sure you only use your debit card on trusted and secure websites or payment terminals. So look for the padlock symbol in your browser address bar. Make sure the website's URL begins with HTTPS. Make sure it's a secure connection. Make sure it's a site you trust. Make sure the domain name matches the site you expect it to make sure it's not a spoofing site or a phishing site. Also, as we said before, monitor your account activity. Review your bank statements to identify any unauthorized transactions. Here's what's really important. Report any suspicious activity to your bank immediately. Very, very quickly. As soon as you notice anything off, call your bank and report it immediately. Speed is the key. Time is of the essence. To help with this, you can consider setting up transaction alerts or notifications that will inform you of any activity on your account. So one thing I've recommended before is just set up alerts so that every single transaction sends you a text message. It might get annoying, but what's more annoying is getting hacked and getting your money stolen. So most banks will let you set up an alert so that every single transaction results in a text message, and that'll give you really clear visibility into every single transaction. So if you see something that comes across your text messages that looks suspicious, you can immediately dig into it and see what it is. Also, use strong and unique, PINs and passwords for your accounts. So if your PIN is 1234 or all zeros in a row, not terribly secure. Don't use things like, your birthday and stuff like that, really obvious stuff. Also, passwords for your bank accounts. Make sure those are strong and not something obvious like your dog's name. So also be cautious when sharing your debit card information, over the phone. Make sure it's only being given to trusted sources. If someone calls you and pretends to be the IRS or your bank or some trusted source, and they ask for your card information, be immediately suspicious. That doesn't happen. And again, as I've mentioned before, it's really, really important to report any suspected fraud to your bank as soon as possible. I will talk a little bit more about this, but speed is of the essence here. So reporting debit card fraud, again, take immediate action, contact your bank, your financial institution, report the fraudulent activity. They will give you instructions on what to do, on how to, freeze your account, cancel the card, potentially recover any lost funds, and, give them all the details of what happened, dates, times of transactions that you expect are fraudulent, and just make sure you work with your bank to get everything cleaned up. Record all your communication with your bank as well. Every conversation you have with your bank, make a note of it in a document. Talk about the date, time, what you talked about, and that will help you kind of track the correspondence and make sure everything's organized. All right, let's talk about fraud protections. Debit card versus credit card fraud protection. So debit cards and credit cards typically offer slightly different levels of fraud protection, but it also depends on the specific policies of your bank or the financial institution that issued the card. Here's a general overview. Credit cards. Under U.S. law, if your credit card is used fraudulently, you're liable for up to $50, but many credit card companies waive this and offer zero liability policies. That means if someone makes a fraudulent charge on your account, you won't owe anything. This protection is provided under the Fair Credit Billing Act, or FCBA. This is for credit cards. So again, credit card liability is only up to $50. but many card companies will waive even that and give you zero liability. So credit cards typically offer the best possible liability protection. Let's talk debit cards. With debit cards, your liability for fraudulent transactions depends on how quickly you report the loss. Under the Electronic Fund Transfer Act, or EFTA, if you report the loss of a card before it is used, you're not responsible for any charges you did not authorize. So if you report the loss within 2 business days after you realize your card is missing, you'll be held liable for up to $50 of unauthorized charges. So it has some similarities to credit cards, but that 2-day window is what's important. So if you notice fraud, if you lose your card, if you report it lost or stolen within 2 days after you realize your card is missing, you'll only be held liable for up to $50. Now, what is that date of when you realize the card is missing? I suppose that's open to interpretation, but I think the idea is just being very prompt about it. So, in theory, if you report a fraudulent transaction immediately, you should be fine. So beyond those 2 days, up to 60 calendar days after your statement is sent to you, you could be responsible for up to $500 in unauthorized charges. That's the cap after 60 days. And then beyond those 60 days, you could legally be liable for all the money lost. So again, this is why speed is of the essence. Those 2 days are really important. So report fraud immediately. If you wait up to 60 days, you could be liable for a cap of up to $500, which is not great. However, here's the caveat. Many banks and financial institutions offer zero liability policies for debit card fraud, meaning they may provide better protection than what's required by law. So this is the caveat. This is what's really important, because a lot of people think, oh, debit cards have bad fraud protection. Credit cards are always better. It really depends on your bank. There are many banks that offer the exact same zero liability policies that credit cards do, but for debit cards. So you want to talk to your bank, look at their policies, look at their terms and conditions, and get a sense of what protections are offered for your debit card by your bank. And depending on your bank, you may have the same protections as you would with a credit card. So it's case by case on your bank. So be aware of that. Pay attention to what your bank's policies are. Again, it's also worth noting, though, that with debit cards, money is taken directly from your bank account. So fraud can result in immediate loss of funds. So while you might eventually be reimbursed, it can take time for the bank to investigate and refund your money. With credit cards, by contrast, you can dispute the charges and withhold payment to the credit card company while they investigate without any money leaving your account. So there is a difference there in risk. So while debit cards do offer substantial fraud protection, generally speaking, credit cards often provide more robust protection against fraudulent charges. So again, check with your bank, make sure you understand the policies. So again, I am an advocate of using debit cards instead of credit cards. However, I am very clear about the risks. So if you decide to use debit cards like I do, you'll want to make sure you have a backup source of funds in other accounts in case you need to cover lost funds in the short term. So this is where my structured banking system really helps. If you have a structured banking system with multiple bank accounts, this can create this redundancy and that built-in protection. So for example, if my main debit card gets hacked, my main bank account has funds taken from it, you want to have a separate bank as a backup, your emergency fund, your short-term savings. I even have a travel account at a different bank. So I have multiple banks. So it's not the end of the world. I can quickly switch to a different bank account, make do in the meantime. It's not a disaster. So everyone's financial circumstances are different, but if you have the ability to create that redundancy with different bank accounts, that can mitigate a lot of the risk that can come with using debit cards and getting fraud against your debit card. So the aftermath of debit card fraud, it can be a hassle. It can be stressful and time consuming. It's essential to remain patient, be persistent, call your bank, resolve issues with your bank. They'll work with you to resolve. They're incentivized to make sure it gets resolved as well. They don't want this fraud on their books either. So, keep checking your account statements, make sure you stay up to date, communicate with your bank, place a freeze on your credit report for an extra layer of security as well, update your passwords and PINs, etc. So what are some best practices for protecting yourself against debit card fraud? So you want to make sure that you adopt some security best practices. Again, as we talked about before, update your debit card's PIN and passwords on a regular basis. Make sure they're strong and unique. Avoid using easily guessable information like date of birth or consecutive numbers. Also enable two-factor authentication whenever possible. This is when you have to have a text message with a code sent to your phone or maybe a device to in addition to your password before you can get in. So this adds an extra layer of security by requiring a second form of verification. Another important practice, review your credit report on a regular basis. This helps you identify suspicious activity or accounts open in your names that you didn't authorize. And, be cautious of phishing attempts. Be very, very suspicious of pretty much every communication you get that asks for personal information. Avoid clicking on links or providing personal information unless you're certain of the sender's legitimacy. And if you have any doubts at all, contact your financial institution directly through their website that you've typed in directly or their phone number that's on the card to verify the authenticity of any requests. So don't click on links or fill out forms if you have any suspicions at all. So it's really important to understand the implications of debit card fraud, how it happens, how to protect yourself. So definitely familiarize yourself with the different methods employed by fraudsters and scammers to try to get access to your information. So again, the main key here is be vigilant, use strong passwords and PINs, and protect your account, and report any suspicious activity immediately. The sooner and the quicker you report activity that's fraudulent, the less likely you are to be liable for any of it, and the more likely you are to have it cleaned up and funds returned to you quickly. So make sure you follow these best practices. And if you're like me and you prefer using debit cards, you just want to make sure you understand the risks and that you are vigilant and make sure that you minimize the risks and have similar protections to credit card users. Because I like using debit cards because I like the simplicity. There's many reasons I've talked about before in different ways, so I'm not going to go into that in detail, but I don't use credit cards at all. I use debit cards. But again, I understand the risks. I have redundancies in place and I'm vigilant. So be aware of those differences and those issues, and you can protect yourself when using debit cards as well. All right, with that, if you have any questions at all, you're always welcome to reach out via my website. What is my website, you ask? elevationfinancial.com. Pretty easy to find. You can find me there. You can reach out directly or book a complimentary money session. If you have questions about anything, always happy to chat. So with that, thanks for joining me today as always. Have a great day. We'll see you next time.